So the idea that the collaborator, Ran collaborator Carthon, was brought in to be the collaborator for the Titans as the GM who's going to collaborate, like that's been the message. Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast for Monday, January the 23rd. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at Broadway Sports Media. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. Welcome in, everybody. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. I am joined, as always, by a guy that I know had a pretty good weekend, our resident Bengals fan and executive producer of this show, JT. Producer JT, how are we today?
I'm fantastic on this victory Monday morning
that
for
you are.
myself. It was a great weekend. Had the chance to watch at least a half with a bunch of my friends, so it was a good time celebrating that victory. But I have to ask you, how are you, resident Titans Twitter contrarian and Jags treasonist, Easton Freeze? How are you?
I'm fine. Here's the thing. So I'll address this, but we're not gonna build a show around it because it's silly. I tweeted before the Jaguars and the Chiefs played on Saturday that I was rooting for the Jaguars in that game, and people jumped down my throat, which I guess is understandable on Titans Twitter. But here's the deal: like I was. My rationale is a couple of different. It's twofold, maybe threefold. First of all, I like to root for chaos. So when I don't have a dog in a fight, I'm almost always rooting for underdogs. Another thing is I really love variety. And sorry, shoot me if you disagree, but I'm sick and tired of watching the Chiefs play in the last 2 weekends of the NFL calendar every single year. I don't know why you wouldn't be. If you're a Chiefs fan, of course, that's entirely different. But if you're just a third-party observer of the NFL, I'm not sure why you would want to, in any circumstance, root for the Chiefs. I understand there's a rivalry component there for Titans fans. And you know, the Jaguars, my reasoning is if you're a big boy franchise that is a winning franchise, and that's what the Titans have been for a while now, in my eyes, the Chiefs are significantly more a rival of yours than the Jags are right now. Just in terms of the past, take that last half decade, take the last decade, I'm imagining. The record between the Titans and the Chiefs has actually been competitive, and they've been, for the most part, the winners, the big boys in their respective divisions. The Jaguars have been dreadful until 10 seconds ago. And so I guess until the Jaguars can back it up with maybe minimum 2 consecutive seasons in which they aren't a total dumpster fire, then I think they can come sit at the big boys table. But until then, I would see the Chiefs as more of your rival as a Titans fan than the Jaguars are. Nonetheless, I can see both sides. And I said in my tweet, flippant hyperbole and sarcasm on my part, I said that I couldn't understand wanting to root for the Chiefs, that was a poor choice of words. I was exaggerating. It's the internet. People do that. I can understand why you would root for either team. I just personally was rooting for the Chiefs. And the long game there was that I felt like if the Jaguars won, there was going to be a pretty good chance it wouldn't be the Jaguars in the Super Bowl. But if the Chiefs won, there's a pretty good chance that with them getting to host the game now for the AFC Championship game, they're going to be the ones in the Super Bowl again. And look, lo and behold, now we have Chiefs Bengals in the AFC Championship again. You know, that's not a story we've seen before. It's not a movie we've already seen. That's super exciting. Hope you guys are all happy. But here, like, yeah, I had a lot of people disagreeing with me, and that's fine. Like, I don't care. Root for who you want to. I was just saying that I don't understand personally not rooting against the Chiefs pretty much in all circumstances. I'm also not somebody that's super petty for the most part. When my team gets beat by a team, I typically root for them to succeed at least a little bit, because it only makes you look worse if you're like the Vikings and you get beat by the Giants and then they get boat raced by the Eagles. Like, I guess some petty Giants fans are happy that the Giants went and got some petty Vikings fans rather are happy that the Giants went and got killed. But that just makes you look awful. Like, the Vikings defense looked worse this weekend in comparison to how they played last weekend against the Giants, up against what we saw in the Eagles playing against this Giants team, and it not mattering at all what the Giants threw at them on either side of the ball. Like, that makes you look worse. So I'm not saying that you should, as a Titans fan, want the Jaguars to go win a ring because they beat you and won the division. That's ridiculousness. Of course not. But the idea that you can't root for a team in your division to knock off another team you find annoying is silliness to me. And I had somebody ask me, well, I'll get to that in a moment, but I will say it was funny. I got quite a few insults hurled my way because of that tweet that were essentially just saying that I'm the next Jared Stillman, which is hilarious. I think it's a really funny dig. If you know me, you know that's funny because you know that I hate Jared Stillman, not as a person, but as a personality on radio and in broadcast. But, if you mean that seriously on the internet, let me suggest that maybe you don't know anything about me or the work that I do. I'm not so insecure that I'm gonna have to sit here and defend myself and explain to you why I'm not Jared Stillman. I'll just say that if you think that I am similar in any way to Jared Stillman as one of the, I'd say, leaders in the Nashville media market, outwardly expressing my disdain towards Jared Stillman. I've not been afraid, like some others, to express how much I dislike him, and the job, dislike the job that he does. Again, personally, I have nothing against him personally. I have no reason to hate him as a person. I just think he kind of stinks at his job. So if you think that me, the guy who's constantly railing on the job that Jared does, is similar to Jared, it's just it makes me laugh. But I also got a question from somebody in the process asking me if I'm actually a Titans fan or not. And there seems to be this misconception out there. So I'd like to take an opportunity to maybe kind of put this to rest and clear things up. In this capacity, on this show, on BroadwaySportsMedia.com, and any written work that I do on Twitter, on my Twitter account, in all three of those mediums, I am not a Titans fan. I'm not. This is not. I don't run a Titans Twitter fan page. This is not a Titans fan podcast. This, my written work is not Titans fan blogging. I'm credentialed by the Tennessee Titans. I cover them as an objective reporter and observer. I'm a broadcaster that covers them in an objective manner. So, like, my job is to cover the team and do those things on a professional level. So I'm a third party observer in that capacity. But also, I can understand it being confusing because in my personal life, and JT, you know this, in my personal life, I am a Titans fan. I was born a Titans fan. One of the few Nashville natives in this city. It's mostly transplants, but I was born and raised here. I've had my dad has had season tickets since before I was born. He was a season ticket founder when the Titans moved to town. So I spent my entire life going to games and wearing jerseys and doing all the fan things. And so, like, I still am that fan today in my personal life on my couch sitting at home. Or out with my friends and family watching the Titans game on the road or whatever it may be. But there's a distinction between my personal and my private life. So it's kind of a tricky line to walk sometimes because I do pride myself, JT, on my ability. And I'd say that you would probably back me up on this. And I think anybody that listens to my show or reads my content or follows my work would agree with this as well. I do a very good job of separating those two things. And that's, to the disdain of many Titans fans who wish that, certain media members were more friendly towards their team. And, like, I get it because I have been and am on both sides of the fence here, in terms of fan and professional media member. So I get it. And I understand sometimes what I say might be frustrating to you as a Titans fan. And there are certainly things that I have to say and do as a Titans fan that I'm not happy about as a Titans fan because you talk about the Titans losing 7 games in a row or people deserving to be fired or like that stinks. You don't want to go into that as a fan, but also it's my job to do that. So I just do. So I guess just kind of think about, Mina Kimes as a Seahawks fan or Ben Solak as an Eagles fan or Chris Sims as a Giants fan. Like, this is something that in new media, which I'm based on my age, I think JT, you and I are in that group, whether we want to or not. It's not something that's really that big a deal to be a fan of a team and also be an objective reporter or broadcaster or analyst or whatever it may be, or writer. But a lot of the old heads in media kind of frown upon this idea that, like, if you admit your allegiance in any way to a team in a league that you cover, suddenly you can't be taken seriously anymore. Like, to each their own, man, I guess. If I think that's a pretty old man, yelling at clouds, get off my lawn way to look at sports. I think you should probably judge each person on their merits and their ability to objectively cover sports. I also think it's a big fat lie that anybody would tell you in media, like, yeah, I'm not a fan at all of this sport. Like, I'm sure there are some people in sports that don't have they're not a fan of a team. Like Buck Rising, for example, friend of the show, been on the show. I'm friendly with Buck. We've spoken many times. He's somebody that claims, swears up and down, Paul Kaharski as well, by the way, swears up and down that they don't have a team in the NFL. They're not fans of the NFL. And with those two guys, I believe them. I think that they don't. And that's fine. If you're not a fan of a team in the league that you cover, that, you're the ultimate objective observer, I suppose. But also, I don't think it's a requirement, and I don't think you have to be that way if you're just good at your job, which I think that I am, and good enough to be able to operate in that way. So yeah, that's kind of the deal with me, and that's why sometimes I say and do things that tick off Titans fans, and I think some people get me a little bit mixed up with a lot of the different accounts and personalities we have here at Broadway Sports Media. Which, and again, I have nothing against fans covering sports like that. That's fine by me. Our most popular podcast on our podcast network is Football and Other F Words, and it has, since its inception, been a very high quality, highbrow, intelligent, entertaining fan podcast. There's a lot of fan podcasts and bloggers and shows out there that suck, and I'm not going to sit here and just tell you all of them, even though I could name 6 right now, because that's mean, and I'm not intentionally trying to be mean to anybody. But like, that's a thing that you can be. You can be a fan writer or blogger or podcaster. I'm not, and that's the distinction there. So hopefully that clears it up, and hopefully that we can put that to rest. Because again, I didn't send the tweet saying that I was rooting for the Jags, intending for everybody to get up in arms. But sometimes it happens. Sometimes you just have to go full Jon Snow in the meme where he's got his sword out against the entire army. And so that was my Saturday. But overall, watched a lot of football this weekend, JT, and we'll move on from that. We're going to talk about all that football that we watched in a little bit in the news segment. But today we've got 2 big segments on deck. We're going to talk about Ran Carthon, whose introductory press conference I had the privilege of being at this past Friday afternoon. Now it feels like a lot longer ago than that, but it was just this past Friday. Got to see and hear a lot of things, meet Ran, the man himself. So we got a full Ran rundown for you. And then after that, we have our typical Titans news segment with producer JT. We'll talk about all the odds and ends from the past couple of days in the Titans Twitter sphere, news sphere. And then we will move on to giving a quick rundown of each of the games that we saw in the divisional round, which I think overall, JT, was personally pretty underwhelming for me. It was the worst divisional round that I can remember, just as a third-party observer looking to watch entertaining football. Wasn't a whole lot of it this weekend, unfortunately.
Yeah, if you were looking for, all biases aside, if you were rooting for a team, just looking at the games as themselves, they weren't the most barn burner, nail biting games. A lot of them came down. A couple of them came down to the wire, but it wasn't like it was, I don't know who's going to win this game.
Yeah,
It
it's
was
kind
more
of a
like,
fake come down to the wire, right? It's
yeah,
like, is
right,
somebody going to pull a big upset? Not because the team that was out in front in both, because I'm assuming you're alluding to the 49ers game and the Chiefs game. In both of
yeah,
those games, it wasn't like a back and forth where it's really dramatic, right? It was let's see if the team that's leading blows this, or let's see if the team that's trailing can mount a miraculous comeback,
for
and
sure.
they didn't. So again, there wasn't. It was meh to me, and we won't jump the shark on that. We'll talk more about it later in the show. First, let's get into Ran Carthon. Before we get into this segment, I have to preface it with our typical sell a little bit early here today, because if there is ever an episode, JT, that you need to be watching on YouTube instead of, or maybe as well as listening on your podcast platform of choice, this is the one, man, because we have like 13 different clips from the Ran Carthon press conference that we're going to go through, analyze, discuss. It's a lot. This is the most comprehensive anything that you're going to find on Ran Carthon so far with the Tennessee Titans. So I'm excited to give you this rundown. It's all essentially predicated on the article that I wrote on Friday that is up at BroadwaySportsMedia.com right now. If you'd like to go and check that out, it's a full rundown of the Ran Carthon interview. We're going to go through that article here, and we're going to go through all the clips that we have from that interview. I'll say off the top just a couple of personal thoughts on how the day went for Ran. It was a big deal. Obviously, bringing in a new GM is a massive deal. If you saw on Twitter how the Titans media team had posted the different reactions by the Titans front office. Well, not even the front office, the Titans HQ, the facility with all of the different employees when Ran Carthon walked into the door for the first time. Everybody up and down the staircase and on the balconies clapping for him. That was kind of the vibe for his introductory press conference. Different location than most of the press conferences we have at St. Thomas Sports Park. Bigger affair. A lot of family there for Ran Carthon supporting him in what was a really exciting day for him and for the Titans franchise. Miss Amy Adams Strunk was there. First time that I got to interact with her in person. A lot of big names and faces all there to celebrate and introduce formally the Titans' new GM, who, hopefully will be around for years to come. Carthon actually came into, and JT, I hadn't said this anywhere on Twitter or anything, but this is a funny story. When I got to the Titans facility, I go into the media entrance and I go to the staircase that leads up to the media entrance. And it wasn't locked, I don't think. But as I grab the door handle, somebody on the other end opens the door handle. So it's kind of that awkward. Oh, we both opened it at the same time. And it's Ran Carthon behind the door with the Titans head of PR guiding him around. And I was just like, oh, hello, like totally caught me off guard. I didn't think the first person that I would see at the Titans facility coming out of a random stairwell was the guy who is now the general manager of an NFL team. But that's how it worked. And so I actually followed him up the stairs and we were headed to the media holding room where he came in off the record before the press conference began. A really classy move by a classy guy introducing himself to the media group and just saying that he was excited to put names to faces and get to work and appreciated the job that those of us in the media do. And so that was really kind of him. He's the kind of guy, JT, just off the top. He's the kind of guy that has the unique ability to both have a large and looming presence and also be incredibly approachable. He's the kind of person that when they walk in the room, and this is, a combination of traits or skills that are, I would say, invaluable when it comes to upper level management and leadership, especially in a job like GM of an NFL team. He's the kind of guy that can walk into a room and immediately the way that he speaks, the way that he carries himself, it's a winner, it's a leader, it's a guy who carries confidence on his shoulders and leadership prowess in the way that he conducts himself that is immediately evident to you, whether you're speaking with him or watching him speak to others or watching him interact with others or watching him do his work. That's the kind of guy that he is. But also, when and if you get to speak to him, it's immediately obvious that this is the kind of guy you could get into a conversation with over a drink and an hour could go by and you wouldn't know where the time went. He's the kind of person that when you talk to him, you can tell he really cares about what he's talking about. He cares about hearing from you. He cares about building relationships. And all of that is kind of just confirmation of what we've been hearing about him. This guy who's the ultimate collaborator, right? The guy who is fantastic with building relationships and working in unison with others. That was the sell for Ran Carthon when he was hired. And in getting to interact with him a little bit in person, that is absolutely the person that he is. I don't think there's any phoniness to that at all. And listen, I've not worked long in person with a lot of NFL, different people working within the NFL, but I have already met quite a few people that come across as a little phony in that way. He is not one of those people. So he came in, introduced himself to us in the media holding room, and then we headed up to what was the top level of part of the Titans facility over there in North Nashville that overlooked the main training facility and practice field. There was a big setup with television cameras and extra seats for friends and family that were coming in. And the entire front row was just for family on one side and Titans executives on the other. It was folks like Amy Adams Strunk and different members of the ownership group and Mike Vrabel. And then all of us in the media in the rows preceding that. He came in. It was started out by Amy Adams Strunk. And before we get to what she had to say at the beginning of the press conference, I just want to show a quick video, JT. Not only is Ran Carthon a classy individual, but he is also very stylish. We had this clip from our buddy, friend of the show, Teron Davenport over at ESPN. Go ahead and roll that clip, JT. This is Ran Carthon and his entire family wearing matching Jordans for this event, which was really cool. And they were dripped out and excited to be there. So there they all were with their custom Titans Jordans on the front row. Ran and his family waiting to be introduced by Titans controlling owner Amy Adams Strunk, who got up and spoke about, in her opening statement, the Titans GM search over the past weeks and months. She thanked the internal candidates in Monty Austinfort and Ryan Cowden, congratulating Austinfort, of course, on his new job as the GM of the Arizona Cardinals, and expressing appreciation for Ryan Cowden, who she said she wholeheartedly believes will be a GM one day. And then Strunk, in her statement, she reiterated that the Titans had cast a very wide net, which was evident by the pool of people that they'd been interviewing for the job. And she explained what it was about Carthon that won them over. JT, let's play clip 2.
Thank y'all for coming today, and isn't this a very exciting day for our franchise? Welcome to the Carthon family and friends, and we're glad to have you here with us to join in the excitement, but welcome. And before we bring up the man of the hour, you Ran, let me first say a bit about the search process that brought us to today. When we started back in December, it was important to me that we define exactly what we were looking for in a new GM, and that we cast a wide net for people to talk to. We were fortunate that our process included several extremely talented candidates, all with impressive backgrounds and experiences, and I want to thank them all for their time and interest in us. And in particular, I'd like to thank Monty Austinfort and Ryan Cowden. Congratulations to Monty on his new position with the Cardinals. I enjoyed getting to know Monty during his time in Nashville, and I'm thrilled for him and his family. I also want to express my appreciation to Ryan Cowden for his work over the years and for his tremendous leadership of the personnel team over the past 6 weeks. Ryan is a great leader and football evaluator, and no doubt he will one day soon be an outstanding general manager. But in the end, Ran stood out as the clear choice as the next general manager of the Titans for a few reasons. He's a former player who grew up around the game. He has a strong record of success in evaluating talent and roster building at multiple teams. And really what impressed me the most was his growth mindset, clear vision, and ability to connect with people.
Growth mindset, clear vision, and ability to connect with people. That's a pretty fantastic headliner for your resume for your new GM. And she went on to say that in their process with the Titans ownership group, coaches, Mike Vrabel, the feedback was unanimous. Apparently, everyone was very much in on Ran Carthon as the next GM of the Titans. And I think that's a big part of the reason why the GM search seemed to accelerate very quickly on Tuesday last week, when they went from round 2 of interviews. Here we go. And then seemingly 2 hours later, it was Ran Carthon. You are now the 14th general manager in Tennessee Titans franchise history. So he was introduced as the new GM. He and Mike Vrabel both gave prepared statements beforehand. Essentially, Ran thanked his family, had a funny anecdote about his wife. Ran, of course, he spent time, if you listened to our last episode of the show, you knew that he spent some time as a running back in the league, which is fantastic, by the way, a former running back named Ran. That is perfect irony. He spent some time in the league as a bottom of the roster guy, a running back for the Colts for, I think, just one season, but he was dating his now wife at the time. And his anecdote was essentially that he'd told his wife back in the day when he was playing that when he was done in his playing career, he wanted to become a GM one day. And she told him at the time that she almost broke up with him because she didn't want to live with somebody who was delusional and lived in La La Land. So he essentially from the podium was like, look at me now. So that was super cool and a funny moment, and a pretty surreal thing. Like the idea that you can say, hey, I'm the GM of a franchise in the NFL after being a player. I would imagine most players don't think that that's possible, and it's a real triumph for Ran to have accomplished that. He then was introduced and Let's see. The next clip is of him talking about, I believe this is from his prepared statement. He and Mike Vrabel, both in their statements, were very complimentary of one another. They both mentioned their ability in the interview process to talk hours and hours on end, which was kind of my impression of Ran beforehand. That was kind of the guy, that was the kind of guy he was. They seemed very, very comfortable with one another already, which I think is one of the bigger reasons as to why he is now the GM of the team. Let's play clip 3. This is Ran Carthon on Mike Vrabel.
He's a football coach, and you could see that, and it permeates off of him, off of the screen. So I was excited to get the opportunity to meet with him this past Tuesday, and like he said, we just had a level of conversation that could have went hours. And so what I do recognize and understand with Mike, our core philosophy and just our ground base of football, it comes from a similar place. So that's going to allow us to kind of start, at a higher level. And I'm just looking forward to working with him and building this team.
We asked Carthon about the specifics of his areas of focus in the past, because, of course, he spent the past decade essentially as director of pro personnel with the Rams and then the 49ers. Before that, he was in pro scouting with Thomas Dimitroff and the Atlanta Falcons. And so there's kind of a question there as to just how involved he's been in the past with the draft process, with the scouting process, evaluating college players and not just focusing on free agency and pro personnel, right? And he assured us that his experience with scouting and in the draft was just as extensive, that his role as a director of pro personnel was really more a title than anything else. Let's play clip 4.
I've been predominantly pro by title. So I've had draft experience since I've come into this league. Just again under people who understood my skill set and allowed me to grow from that space. So director of pro scout, those have just been my titles, but not necessarily my job.
This next clip is Carthon's response to being asked, and I forget the exact question word for word, but essentially the question was how significant he felt it was that he's the 14th general manager in Tennessee Titans franchise history, but he's the first general manager that is African American. And he was asked about the significance of that to him. I thought his answer was really poignant and excellent. Here's what he had to say.
It's very significant. I understand I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, and there have been plenty of men that have come before me that have laid this foundation that allowed me to be in this spot. And it's paramount in my mind to do the work and be successful, to leave the door open, for other young black men that are coming behind me, because there are a lot of talented young black men that can do the job. They just need the opportunity. And, I don't go out seeking, to be the first black at anything. I just want to be the best me. And, very prideful, but I just want to be the best. I don't care if it's black, I don't care if it's white, I want to be the best. And the significance of it, my aunt who's here, she texted me and asked, and I was like, honestly, I don't know. And she was like, well, you might want to find out. And so that's when it first, dawned on me that I was the first black GM.
The past couple of clips are brought to us by Paul Kaharski and Teron Davenport on Twitter, by the way, just to give proper credit there. But I thought that last part of the answer was exactly what you want to hear from your guy, right? He said, I don't go out seeking to be the first black anything. I just want to be the best me. I'm very prideful. I just want to be the best. I don't care if it's black, if it's white. I just want to be the best. And that's a fantastic answer, I think, from Carthon, and exactly the kind of thing that you want to hear from your guy, that he's interested in, not being the best black GM in history. He's interested in being the best GM that the Titans have ever had. He's interested in being the best GM in the league. He's interested in going and getting rings. And that's fantastic. He was then asked later about the attractiveness of this position with the Titans. It was an open GM role, and there's only 32 of those jobs in the entire world. If you want to be a GM of an NFL team, that market is set. There are no more or no less until I guess eventually the NFL expands one day. But besides the fact that it was an open GM role, what was it about the Titans that he found attractive? And his response was really to immediately recognize that front row of Titans executives, members of ownership, Amy Adams Strunk, Mike Vrabel, all the folks that he'd been working with in his interview process. it was the people that represent this organization that stood out to him first. And he initially met with some of those guys back in Dallas in December during the league owners meetings. They have a program called the NFL Accelerator Program, which is for I think lower to mid-level executives, if I understand correctly, to get exposure with ownership groups. And I think it also targets minority candidates in a way that allows folks to get proper recognition and a proper shot, which is part of the NFL's initiative in that way. But this is what Carthon had to say in this clip that's courtesy of Tennessee Titans on Twitter about how Ran felt like this was the right fit for him.
These people on the front row, obviously, and I talked with Miss Amy about this, GM has always been a dream of mine, but it was always about the right fit, and it wasn't about getting the job. It was being in a place that's going to support you and put you in a position to keep the job. And like I said, when I met, these guys in, I guess 3-4 weeks ago, whenever it was, it really opened my eyes. And then throughout the interview process and actually getting a chance to meet Kenneth throughout that process, it just confirmed to me that this is the place that I wanted to be. I'm coming from a good situation in San Francisco. It was a really great building, a lot of strong relationships there. So for me to leave and want to seek opportunity somewhere else, it had to be a special place, and I truly believe that this place is special.
Another topic of discussion, naturally, was analytics, something that the Titans have very famously, under John Robinson and Mike Vrabel, been not the most advanced on. It's something that they've really comfortably lived behind the 8 ball in comparison to the rest of the league when it comes to advancing these, or accepting and implementing these advanced metrics and these different modern ways of approaching the game and understanding players' bodies and recovery and rest and ability to maximize your efforts on the field. All of these things that analytics allow us to do, the Titans haven't been super hot on in the past. Ran mentioned how he'd worked in San Francisco with who is currently the Vikings general manager, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. He was, in his time in San Francisco when Ran was there, the director of their analytics department, and said that they did a lot of work hand in hand with the scouting department and those in the analytics department in a successful way, which is something that you want to hear. Here's his response to being asked about how he thinks analytics plays a part in today's NFL.
Analytics a lot in the 49ers. In actuality, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, who's now the GM in Minnesota, he ran our analytics department a couple years ago. Spent a lot of time with those guys. I think it definitely plays a part. We trust our eyes as scouts, but sometimes the data can drive you to a decision and help you see it from a different vantage point. So I think there's a place in our game for it. We've talked about it during the interview. I think in the genesis of analytics, it was kind of pitting analytics and scouting, against each other. And a lot of the things we did in scouting was essentially analytics. It just didn't have the title. So it has a part in our game, and we're going to use every tool here to help us build a championship roster.
The quote there that really sticks out to me, he says, "I spent a lot of time with those guys. It definitely plays a part. We trust our eyes as scouts, but sometimes the data can drive you to a decision and help you see it from a different vantage point," which I think is the perfect middle ground, reasonable, dangerous word here, nuanced way to approach analytics in today's NFL, but not go full 2021 Brandon Staley and be a lunatic with the numbers, ignoring what you see with your eyes. Clearly, the Titans' new GM, he thinks analytics have a place in the modern NFL, which is representative of what I think, and we've talked about on this show for a couple of episodes now. It's representative of the philosophical shift that this franchise is undergoing this season. But Carthon seems to, and this is the important bit to me, he seems to be the perfect happy medium that you might expect folks like Amy Adams-Strunk and Mike Vrabel to want to implement as the GM of this team, to want to work with directly. Somebody willing to use all of the tools available to them, use all of the things at their disposal to better the football team, and somebody who's not beholden to this narrow-minded religion of Manalytics and the eye test, or just as narrow-minded and just as fanatic-y is the church of analytics, right? Like the people on either end of the spectrum of this debate are annoying to no end, and I think they don't deserve the time of day, frankly, because it's never so black and white in life. So that's something that I think he'll do a good job of merging that old school scouting mentality with some of the modern numbers and metrics that allow us to get a better feel for the game. He went on to tell a story on this same topic about his involvement in the selection of a running back who, if you watched football this past yesterday on Sunday, if you're listening to this on Monday, you saw this guy play and be a big part once again of the 49ers returning to their conference championship game. He helped select Elijah Mitchell in, I think, the fifth or sixth round of the 2020 NFL draft. And he detailed in his response how this choice came together as a result of combining the advanced metrics with what they saw on tape. It was a draft day audible, it sounded like, that secured them a player who helped them tremendously on their playoff run last year, and I think is helping them right now that he's healthy and back in that really ferocious running game of Kyle Shanahan's out there in San Francisco. So this was one of the highlights of the press conference to me, JT. And I think he gives a fantastic example in this answer of just how you can merge old school scouting with modern analytics. Here was his response.
That one, two things, two stories, quick ones. You'll quickly learn about me. I like to tell stories. And it's not necessarily about myself, right? We talked about analytics earlier. Demetrius Washington, he's the VP of Ops for Minnesota. He ran our analytics department after Kwesi left. He does his metrics, to find, all his guys. So he comes to me, he has a running back, and he's like, man, my numbers are telling me this is the best outside zone running back in the draft. He was like, but I'm not walking in there with Kyle with just this paper to say that. Can you watch this guy and see if you can confirm what the tape saw? And I watched the tape. That was my first exposure to the player, and I agreed with him. And then that player ended up being Elijah Mitchell that we took in the 6th round, which last year, if we don't have Elijah, we don't go on the run that we went on. And even added to that story, D'Amico Ryans, it was his first year as D coordinator, and that round, that pick was going to be his linebacker. And D'Amico, when he came in the draft room, Elijah's tape was on, and he was watching Elijah, and he called Johnny Holland, our linebacker coach, up and was like, Coach, this running back is better than the linebacker we're going to pick. And so we shifted from taking a linebacker and took Elijah. And it just kind of shows to the collaboration of how that whole operation works. So those are the two that stood out.
That was a fantastic answer. Now, an answer that wasn't given at any point in this press conference by anybody in the Titans brass was one that is important and I think is going to be a hot topic throughout the offseason into the first year, maybe two of this new regime. And it was one that was, it was a question that was asked many times. The lack of answer was not for lack of asking. The question was essentially, what exactly is it that you do here now? Right? Like who does what? What is the division of power between the GM, the head coach, and the owner? Because now there's a big question that I think is relatively fair when it comes to how this team is going to operate at the top of the food chain because of the odd decision to fire John Robinson and then the reasonable questions surrounding, well, does Mike Vrabel want some more power? Does he want more say in personnel? There's a number of questions along that front. And the first one is, okay, who does what? Let's figure out who does what. And of course, in very predictable fashion, the Titans don't want us to know who does what. That's kind of been their shtick for a while now. So here was his first response when asked about who has final say over the Titans roster.
I think that matters because I think the word and what we truly believe here is collaborating. I think all that comes down to, in my opinion, is a matter of ego. Mike and I, we're here to work together, and we're going to bring the people in here that we see fit, and we're not going to see it the same way all the time, but he and I will have the mutual respect to be able to work through that, and we'll get the right people in here.
That this obfuscation from Carthon, which clearly is a coordinated effort from Titans brass, it continued every time that he was asked a question like this, and he was always referring back to this buzzword that has followed him around ever since he was named the new GM of the Titans. It's collaboration. He's the collaborator. We're collaborating. Don't ask who does what. We're working together. It's a group project. Okay. This conversation, I think, again, fairly sparked by Amy Adams Strunk's decision to fire John Robinson in the middle of the season last year, and then the speculation that Mike Vrabel might want more say in the operations of the franchise outside of his usual coaching tasks. These are things that, you know, were not rendered unfounded by the answers in the press conference. I think that the speculation that there was a rift there when it came to the owner and the GM, and that's why there was a firing at a weird time. And hey, there's probably some desire for more power from Mike Vrabel. Those speculations, the murmurs only grew. They only grew, and they only became more reasonable when the Titans organization and the new GM continued to not be interested in answering this question. Carthon said it himself, right? He said Strunk brought him in to be a collaborator. And so I think it's become painfully obvious in the past couple days, weeks, months, these reports that we've seen come out along the lines of John Robinson being not all that great as a team player, not all that great as a collaborator. I don't think collaborator would be anywhere near the top of the list of words that anybody that worked with John Robinson would use to describe him, frankly, based on what we've heard and seen. And again, we talked about in a past episode how teams, when it comes to hiring head coaches or top end executives, they tend to swing really hard for the rebound. They typically go for the opposite of what they had, or they go really all in on the one trait that they were annoyed they were missing in the first place. And so the idea that the collaborator, Ran collaborator Carthon, was brought in to be the collaborator for the Titans as the GM who's going to collaborate. Like, that's been the message. And I think that's no mistake. I think that is a reflection of what the Titans felt like they were lacking with their last general manager. The expectations from Strunk seem to be along these lines. And another reason to think that, I think, is, we still have this question floating out there. Will Mike Vrabel have more say in roster construction? I feel like the answer is pretty obviously yes, based on all these things we just went over, all the things that we've heard, what we're about to hear in his second non-answer on the same question. But Vrabel used to answer to Robinson. We knew that. It was defined by him, by the GM, by ownership. They all gave the same message on this, right? John Robinson is over Mike Vrabel, and John Robinson answers to Amy Adams Strunk. There was a clear, linear order of operations there. Now, according to Amy Adams Strunk, the owner is being reported to by both the head coach and the GM. Now it's a triangle. It's no longer this linear progression up the food chain. It is both of these people are colleagues. They are coworkers. They're equals. That seems to be the power dynamic now that has shifted within the Titans organization. And I think for the Tennessee Titans, head coach and GM are going to be viewed now as these coworkers that are expected to collaborate and work together. And so I think it's reasonable, again, to assume, yeah, man, Mike Vrabel's going to have more say over who plays for his team in the future. Here was Paul Kaharski. This is a video from him on Twitter, and it was a question from him. He did a very good job of begging the question here. And despite not getting answers over and over, he asked a couple of times. This was the second attempt at getting any clarification from Ran Carthon. And here's what he had to say when asked about who's in charge of the football operations for the Titans.
With this word collaboration, that's why I'm here, because Miss Amy sees me as a collaborator. So we're here to collaborate. We're here to build this thing together. I think so many times in our game we're trying to fit people into boxes, and that's just, in my mind, that's archaic. We have to create a free-flowing environment, and that's not only with Mike and I downstairs, but it's with the people upstairs, too. So it's got to be a free-flowing collaborative effort. And I understand, you got a job to do to, define these things, but we're truly going to collaborate. And so I don't think it matters who's over football operations, the kitchen staff or whatever. Our job is to build the best building possible, and we're going to do that.
We'll move on from this question because it's one that's, again, going to be continued to ask as we go through this offseason into next season. And it's one that I think the Titans are going to continue to conveniently ignore because this is how they've operated forever. They love to let the figurehead claim responsibility for all things, good or bad, because it keeps anybody from being singled out by fans or the media and the angry mob wanting to put somebody's head on a pike. This is the way that Mike Vrabel's operated with his coaching staff forever. Ultimately, it comes down to me, right? It's all his fault when something goes wrong. And when something goes good, he's happy to attribute that responsibility. The praise should go towards this coach or this player or this position group. But when something goes wrong, we're not blaming anybody but me, man. That's the way that Vrabel has operated for a while now. And that's the way that I think the Titans, even at the upper level of their executives, with the coach, the GM, and the owner, are going to operate. It's going to be a group project, primarily because they don't want those of us in the media and those of us in the fan base to be able to know exactly whose fault something may be. And that's just the frustrating way that they're going to run their operation. So we'll continue to ask, and we'll probably continue to not get answers. Moving on to another topic he addressed when he was asked about the identity of his new football team. Carthon praised the makeup of the Titans and the culture that they have here with his team. One that I think fits really well, the kind of person that he is and the kind of guy he seems to be from a team building perspective, but also in terms of comparing the Titans culture and the 49ers culture, where he's coming from, seems to be a pretty good fit. Here's what he had to say on this front.
Hard they play, and I think the team has been made in the image of our head coach. You know, Mike is a tough guy. He works hard. I just almost said something else, and that's something he said. I think the team is built in his image and what Mike believes in. And like I said before, you know, our core foundation of football comes from the same tree, and I believe in those.
Then came the looming question of injuries. The Titans' new general manager was asked for his thoughts on, the unbelievable rash of injuries that the Titans have suffered the past 2 seasons and whether or not he plans on trying something new to potentially limit that going forward. His response was that, football's a violent sport. There's no way to keep people from getting injured at the end of the day. But he's also aware of the issues the team has and has had and plans to explore every option. That's what his response was. So we'll see how that manifests itself in a tangible way. That's another question we'll continue to ask. And as we go into next season, I can guarantee you, those of us in the media pool will be asking, hey, what did you guys do exactly? Like, who'd you fire? Who'd you bring in? What'd you change? And whether we get a question on that or not, I don't know. I wouldn't hold your breath, but we will try. And he knows a thing or two, Ran Carthon, about backbreaking injuries on your roster. We pointed this out on the last show, JT, that San Francisco is among the only teams in the entire league in the past couple of seasons that has experienced anything similar to what the Titans have on the injury front. They've been just as injury riddled as the Titans have been in the past couple of seasons, and it's tanked a season or two for them. So he knows how to operate in that way. And I guess the good news is he and the 49ers did a really good job of managing that and still being really successful over the past 5 or so years, despite those injuries. But also, not to say he has any say over avoiding said injuries, but there's nothing from the 49ers that you can point to and say like, oh, well, this guy's going to come in and change the culture entirely when it comes to health and safety and strength and conditioning. We don't know. It's going to, I think, still fall largely on Mike Vrabel getting his operation in the locker room and in person with the players changed up a little bit. But here was his answer on the injury front.
We talked about it, and we're going to explore every option to figure out how we can keep our guys on the field. But like you said, it's a violent sport. There's not going to be a perfect way to keep everybody healthy. It's just not possible. But we're going to explore every option to figure out how we're going to be able to maximize keeping our guys on the field.
Okay.
Now, finally, last clip we have here. Ran Carthon gave this answer when I asked him about his familiarity with the Titans roster already. Of course, he just got into town and just began working in the past couple of days, but I was curious as to how familiar he was with this team and where they were and what this roster makeup looked like right now. And he gave what I thought was a really fantastic answer at length, talking about the importance to him of knowing both the player and the person Here's what he had to say on that front.
Baseline of the team, that's a part of the interview process, right? You can't go in there and try to fake your way through the job because Ms. Amy's going to ask the question and she knows the answer. So I feel good about my knowledge of the roster, but again, that's tape. I don't know the people, and that's where Braves and I, when we spoke, he was giving me a little insight on the people. So I think that's just as important, because I have a thing, it's not mine, stole it from a friend. It's called the 21-3 rule, right? So, and he's in the NBA. We all have a way of seeing these players as players 24 hours a day, when in actuality they're only players while they're in your building. So I think it's just as important to know the people just as well as you know the player. So that's the area where with our roster, I want to get to know the people. And I'm going to make a couple phone calls to a couple guys, when I leave from here. And what was the second part of your question?
Just what the process is like for you in the next couple of days and weeks, getting up to speed with where everything's at currently.
Meetings and more meetings. Braves and I are going to continue to spend time together, continue to spend time with the scouts. Again, I'm learning their systems and processes right now for the next 4 months, learning their language, so it's going to be, time on task. So that's going to be it for the next 4 months until we find the right process that fits, our organization. It's not about what I want to come in here and do, but the scouts, they're the lifeblood of what we do. So I want to be able to put something in place that benefits them. And so we're going to continue to create that over the coming months.
I think that's a great answer. I think it's a really fantastic answer. This idea that he's interested in knowing the person and not just the player. So it was a fantastic interview. All in all, listen, winning your introductory press conference as a GM means exactly nothing in the NFL. But for what little you can take away from it, and the job that he'll be doing based on how he did in this press conference, he smashed it. Man, he killed it. He did a fantastic job. And in the end of the press conference, he was joined by Amy Adams Strunk and Mike Vrabel for a photo before he and his family left. And according to Vrabel, they were headed to the bubble with the kids to play around on the practice field. That seemed to be the next stop for the party. We all left, and the press conference, just to wrap it all up with the bow, that was essentially it. I kind of took you through everything of import from the press conference right there. So hopefully you feel thoroughly up to date with how things went. In the end, it was an event for Carthon in his introduction that really, I think, embodied what Amy Adams Strunk and the Titans organization wants this franchise to be. It's a franchise of winning and family and collaboration, I guess, is what we can go with now. So that seems to be the new direction of your Tennessee Titans, and it's going to make for, I think, a very, very interesting next couple of weeks and months. Without further ado, JT, let's get into some Titans news real quick. Before we do that, I have to point out, mandatory of me, if you have not become a Broadway Insider, you need to go and do that. It allows you to get some fantastic perks, such as access to our premium articles, access to our early access articles, access to early live tapings of different podcasts on the platform. This show is going to be doing a lot of live taping over the next couple of months leading up to the draft with some really special guests that you'll get to speak with and interact with the show, become a part of the show by in real time being in the chat. That's a super cool thing that is only afforded to Broadway Insiders. So go and use code INSIDER today, your first month, just 99 cents, which is practically free. You can find that in the sewer grate walking down the street. So go over, become an insider today and try out all of those things. I promise you will not regret it. All right, JT, let's get into the Titans news.
Let's start off this news segment by recapping the Best Bet Gauntlet Playoff Pick 6 for this divisional round. And boy, howdy, did we make you some money this week. 6-1 on the weekend. Let's go through our picks, which cashed and which ones didn't. Jacksonville and KC under 53, cashed. Cincinnati Buffalo under 48.5, cashed. Travis Etienne over 17.5 reception yards, cashed by
Cha-ching, give me 18, baby. Give me 18.
Hurts under 51.5 rush yards, cash. Devin Singletary under 43.5 rush yards, cash. Which, by the way, if anybody knows where Devin Singletary is, it's kind of gone missing. We're putting up posters for him.
I think he got buried by the snow. I don't know if there was an avalanche or what, but he's He's somewhere. You can see an outline of a body just sprawled out like a crime scene in the end zone in Buffalo.
Anyways, his under cashed. And then finally, our bonus pick of the week, Boston Scott over 14.5 rush
Never
yards. The
in
Giants,
doubt,
the
baby.
Giant killer cashed as
Put a
well.
touchdown on there to really seal the deal, the cherry on top.
Yep. So we went 6-1 on the weekend, and over these first 2 rounds, we are 9-4 on the first 2 rounds with the wild card and divisional round. We're coming back once again for championship week, and it only gets a little bit harder. But we're making money right now, so I would stick
cooking,
with
baby.
us.
Don't worry, stick with it. The show has been fantastic. Literally since August, we've been making money on all of our best bet segments. I'm currently actually working on a grand conglomeration of all of our bets this year on record to see just how well we've done, and it's pretty promising so far. So look out in future episodes for a review of just how well the show has done in the betting front this year, and I think it may convince you, if you're not betting with us already, it's time to join the wagon, because we are, in fact, JT, a wagon.
We really are. But let's talk about the Titans now, who have some new possible hires and candidates. Let's start with Chris Harris, which was reported that the Titans are planning to hire Harris as their defensive pass game coordinator/cornerbacks coach. Harris will be joining the staff unless he gets hired as a defensive coordinator elsewhere. But as of right now, it looks like he will be joining the staff. Easton, what are your thoughts on the Titans' first personnel hire other than the GM?
Yeah, it's the first hire of the new coaches that are needed for this team, and I think it's a pretty big one. I think it's a big deal that they've got Chris Harris coming over. Some stats that I found on Twitter, courtesy once again of our local statistician, apparently, Zach Lyons over at Football and Other F Words, does a fantastic job of pulling these stats and making it easy on us. So we appreciate you. Shout out to him for grabbing all of these. The raw stats, when you compare Tennessee's secondary to Washington's last year, Washington was 4th in pass yards allowed. Titans were 32nd. Washington was 10th in the league. When it came to total yards allowed, the Titans were 27th. When it comes to efficiency versus passing metrics, Washington was 9th in EPA up against Tennessee's 28th ranking, and they were 1st in success rate up against the Titans' 25th in success rate in the league. When it came to coverage ratings from PFF, Washington came in at 7th this season, and Tennessee came in at 19th. So having him on the roster, or having him overseeing an element of this roster in the secondary, fantastic upgrade. Seems like a great hire. Now, there's been some confusion, it seems, as to whether or not he's actually on the roster yet, if he signed a contract. The way that it was worded, the announcement, it sounds like he's going to be with the team unless he gets an offer to be a DC somewhere else. So I'd imagine maybe you see him take some interviews with other teams to be the defensive coordinator, but assuming he doesn't get those jobs, he'll be with the Titans. I actually have, JT and I have an inside source in that regard, somebody that is familiar with Chris Harris on a personal level. So we're trying to actually get to the bottom of that question, but if we don't, I'd imagine in the next week or so, we get a firm answer. It does sound like, however, JT, he will be the guy in charge of the secondary for the Titans this year, which should be exciting because in Washington, he did a very, very good job.
The Titans have also spoken to Tim Kelly about the offensive coordinator job. Kelly is, to no one's surprise, the best in-house option for the position and probably the best in-house option for any of the positions left.
I was about to say, it was funny the way that they worded that, JT, because they said he was the best in-house option for OC. My brother in Christ, he was the only option in-house for OC, and I don't think he's an option that people really want. Now, it will not shock me at all if Mike Vrabel decides to make his boy Tim Kelly OC, like he wanted to a couple years ago when they hired Todd Downing and the Texans blocked the interview. So I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all. I wouldn't say it's a favorite, but I would say there's a very good chance. I'd probably say 50-50 right now. Hopefully they don't hire him. I'd love for them to go with somebody outside the organization, but he's certainly up there. And those are my thoughts. Not a whole lot to add other than won't shock me if they hire him. Hope they don't.
Yeah, and speaking of the offense, despite drafting Burks and Kyle Phillips last year, the Titans could very much still use some help in the receiving core. And
Lord
while
knows they could.
these receivers are not reported to be on the block, it makes a lot of sense from contract situations and a couple receiving rooms situations, etc., as to why they could
Restructures. Yeah,
be
you could logically
traded.
assume these guys probably going to be up for sale if the price is right.
So let's run down a few of these guys here and maybe talk about a couple that might be good fits for the Titans.
You want to go one at a time? Just snap judgment, JT?
Yeah, sure. We'll start
right.
with Minnesota Vikings wide receiver 2 now, Adam Thielen.
Old pass.
Any of the Buccaneers wide receivers, really. So Mike Evans.
Julio Jones.
Other than Julio Jones, I guess.
Oh, gotcha. No, I don't think it's actually Mike Evans. Well, maybe he could potentially be up for trade. I'd imagine they're going to retain him, try to retain Chris Godwin. Either of those guys probably too expensive for the Titans' taste, anyways.
Maybe
and
like
the rest,
Scotty Miller then, or
yes,
Russell Gage.
It's all either too expensive and too good, or hard pass because they stink. So.
Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins has been rumored on the trade block, and possible landing spot is
if they go
the
big.
Titans.
If they go big, I kind of like it. It's dangerous with his age. It's dangerous, but I
Another
like
one with a team still in the playoffs is Brandon Ayuk.
I love it. I don't think it's going to be palatable for the Titans from a price standpoint. First of all, I don't think that the Niners are going to want to let him go. I'm not sure whether or not they're going to be able to pay him, but if they can't, I'd imagine he gets big coin somewhere, and I'm not sure that the Titans can offer that.
Next up, we have the fantasy draft killer in Allen Robinson, 2
Gross.
years in a row.
Disgusting. Pass.
Maybe a possible reunion with New York Jets wide receiver Corey Davis.
Okay, it's square and it's boring, but I don't hate it. Obviously, he's familiar with the team. He's familiar with the coach. He's familiar with the scheme. He's a very nice, big-bodied receiver who's got sure hands and can run good routes, got decent speed, very good blocking receiver. If the price is right, because, again, the Titans didn't want to move off him in the first place. They just couldn't contend with the ridiculous price tag that the Jets decided to give him. Like, they gave him just way too much money. And it was the bottom line. The Titans weren't going to overpay for a guy in Corey Davis when they had A.J. Brown, who's going to be around forever, except he wasn't. But yeah, Corey Davis, if he, I'd have to look for the exact numbers, but like off the top of my head, would I be comfortable with Corey Davis on a 2-year, $15 million deal? Yeah, man, I would.
Let's move over to another guy who's kind of bounced around the league, but is still quite young in Cedric Wilson for the Dolphins.
Yeah, he doesn't inspire confidence because you never hear about him. So he seems like another guy that would probably come in and go full Josh Reynolds and be a disaster, and then maybe go somewhere else and flash a little bit. Pass.
Another guy who's bounced around but is old in Brandon Cooks.
Long rumored potential Titans trade candidate Brandon Cooks, of course, has a relationship with Tim Kelly and with Mike Vrabel, of course, and that's something that, maybe, but he's on the wrong side of 30. He's getting old. He's not necessarily a character concern, but he did kind of quit on the Texans this season. Granted, I would have probably too, but it's something that you have to keep your eye on, unless it's really cheap. I'd say hard pass. And again, even if they signed him, I'll put it this way, JT. He's the kind of guy you sign, and if it's the right price, great, fine. But you shouldn't be banking on him filling a starting position.
And then finally, two guys out west who are on reeling AFC teams, Hunter Renfrow and Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, Renfrow is really, really talented, and I think Sutton is as well. They're very different receivers. Sutton, I'd imagine the Broncos aren't going to want to rebuild when it comes to their weapons for Russell Wilson. The last thing that they need is to take away the things that make him look better. And so I'd imagine that they'd like to keep Sutton around. Renfrow, I don't see that as a fit. Mike Vrabel and Ran Carthon talked about at the press conference this past weekend that what's important to them is not collecting talent, but it's building a team, building a roster. And that's an important thing that a lot of folks don't seem to understand, that there has to be some cohesiveness. There has to be a scheme fit. There has to be a need fit. And with Hunter Renfrow, he's a great player, but that's kind of the guy that they just spent draft capital on to get in Kyle Phillips last year. So I don't think they'd be interested.
And finally, talking about someone who wouldn't exactly maybe be a scheme fit, but has all the talent in the world, it was reported by Ian Rappaport that, according to Buccaneers teammates, Tom Brady indicated that he would not be returning to Tampa Bay. So do you think it now becomes a two-horse race between the Titans and maybe possibly the Las Vegas Raiders for the quarterback to come to?
I don't think it's a two-horse race. I think that the Raiders are very much in contention. I think that the Niners will be in contention by default. I think that the Jets will be in contention. I think that the Dolphins aren't an unreasonable possibility based on the past, and Stephen Ross might just double down and see if he can get away with it this time. But yeah, I think that there are 4 or 5 teams, the Titans included, that could reasonably be interested in entertaining Brady. I don't think it's the right move. I am, however, working on an article that I have notes for right here this week at BroadwaySportsMedia.com talking about why exactly Tom Brady would or wouldn't be interested in Tennessee as a landing spot, because of course he's an unrestricted free agent. He's going to have to be, enticed by a team, not just by money, but by fit, because we know Tom Brady, it's not all about the money for him. It's about winning rings. There's a number of reasons why and why not he'd be a fit here in Tennessee, and I'm going to talk about him in that article. I don't know the timeline for when it'll be out. At some point this week. When it is, we'll talk about it on the show. But yeah, I would say don't hold your breath. I think there are at least 2 or 3 teams that are more likely for him to end up with than the Titans. And if he does end up with the Titans, I'm not sure that it guarantees a fantastic result.
That's going to be all our news, at least Titans and NFL otherwise. But now we are going to shift over to recapping this past weekend's divisional round matchups here. As you said earlier in the show, it wasn't the fireworks and electricity that a lot of us were hoping it would be, but still there is a lot to talk about in a lot of these games. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it with this first one, which was the first game on Saturday in which the Chiefs beat the Jaguars 27-20.
Yeah, this was one of those games that's close on paper, wasn't all that close in the game. Really, the most interesting thing that came out of the game is Patrick Mahomes pulled a Ryan Tannehill, got a high ankle sprain, and he's going to be hurting this week. I'd imagine he probably doesn't practice at all, and then for Sunday's game, he'll get shot up real good and numb on that ankle so that he can play. But we saw with Ryan Tannehill this year, he finished a game twice on that high ankle sprain and seemingly was in pain, but managed to, play at a relatively high level in those games after getting injured. And then you saw him not practice again. And both times he missed not just one, but multiple games afterwards to be able to get back and play. So they don't have that option with Mahomes. He's going to have to play next week unless it's full-blown Chad Henne season. But that's something to monitor, and I think that it makes next week's game very interesting with, a very good team in Cincinnati coming to town. In terms of the Chiefs and Jaguars game, the Jaguars were really out of their depth in this game. They were so afraid to throw the ball down the field for a lot of the game. It was kind of baffling, just beyond the line of scrimmage. Let's push the ball downfield. Their offensive line was getting torn to pieces, and that was really kind of the difference. It was the difference in a number of games this weekend, actually. You got to win in the trenches in the playoffs or you're toast. On the Chiefs side of the ball, Travis Kelce, he was on pace at one point to break the all-time NFL record for receptions in a single game. I think he had 10 receptions on 11 targets by halftime, which was insane. The all-time record is held by wide receiver Brandon Marshall when he was with the Jets. And Travis Kelce is a tight end. So kind of a ridiculous game plan by the Jaguars to just ignore Travis Kelce. Bold choice. Cotton, didn't work out for you. One narrative with the Chiefs that I've found kind of strange all season, and it made me think of it in this game. This idea that Patrick Mahomes is doing less with more. Doing more with less. There we go. Had a Listexia moment. Doing more with less on this Chiefs roster. In terms of weapons, that is. I don't understand that this year. He lost Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill's a cheat code. He's an alien. He's one of the best receivers in the league for a reason. He's different than any other receiver in the league for a reason. It's a big deal. But he's still got the best tight end in the league by a country mile. Another cheat code in Travis Kelce, who he exploits on a regular basis. Then you add on top of that the fact that he's got a seemingly infinite stable of wide receiver twos that are above average receivers in the league to just spread the ball around to 19 different guys in a single game with fresh legs. I don't see how he's, his war chest with offensive weapons is not exactly light these days. Okay. So that narrative is a little bit ridiculous. Another narrative before we move on to the next game that I think is pretty funny is this idea that Jacksonville, keep your heads up high, man. Duval County, keep your heads up. It's a bright future ahead. Yeah. So yes, we've been complimentary of the Jaguars this season. I think they've got a fantastic thing going with their budding star at quarterback and their already a star head coach in Doug Peterson. That combination alone is going to win them a lot of games over the next 5-10 years. But this idea that one good game for the Jaguars, I mean, it was tweeted out by Field Yates, who I like and respect, but I thought this was kind of funny. Over the past 5 seasons, the Jaguars in 2018 went 5-11, last in the division. 2019, 6-10, last in the division. 2020, 1-15, last in the division, worst record in the league. 2021, 3-14, last in the division, and worst record in the league again, back-to-back first overall picks. And then in 2022, they go an astonishing 9-8. AFC South champions, and they advanced the divisional round. Big, bright future in Duval. I took that tweet word for word, copied and pasted it, replaced the years, and just said the Jaguars in the 5 seasons before the 5 seasons that Field laid out. In 2013, went 4-12, third in the AFC South. 2014, 3-13, third in the AFC South. 2015, 5-11, third in the AFC South. 2016, 3-13, last in the AFC South. And then 2017, 10-6, AFC South champions. Got to the AFC South, or the AFC Championship game against Tom Brady, and Blake Bortles was a couple of minutes away from going to the Super Bowl and knocking off the New England Patriots. So this idea that one decent season in a half-decade span is evidence that they're going to be good from here on out is funny and ridiculous. How about Duval? You put together just two is all I'm asking. 2 seasons in a row where you're competent. And I'm not saying you won't. I'm saying you need to do that. I think you can, and I think you will, with your head coach and your young roster and your young quarterback. But need to see it first. And it's certainly not a sure thing that they are going to be the class of the AFC South. Although I'm sure in a couple of months when the new lines come out, they will be the betting favorites, and I will happily put an unwise amount of money on the Tennessee Titans once again as non-favorites in the division to win the division, which 2 out of the last 3 years has made me a lot of money. Let's move on to the next game.
Yeah, and the game with probably the biggest mismatch of the whole weekend was the Saturday night game with the Giants heading to the Link to play the Eagles, in which they got absolutely destroyed 38-7.
Yeah, the Giants were big losers, but really bigger losers than them from this game, the Vikings, man. Tough look that you got kind of bullied from the offense of the Giants. At least your defense got pushed around all game, and the Giants could get whatever they want on offense, and then they go to Philadelphia a week later and they can't do anything against the Eagles, who really ragdolled them around for 3 hours. Not to be dramatic, JT, but I think that this was maybe the most boring game in NFL history, like the entire history of the league. It was so incredibly unwatchable. I was at a restaurant watching with friends and did anything but watch this game, essentially. We got to a point, you were there for the back end of it, we got to a point where on one of the only monitors not showing football in the restaurant, there was like online World Series of Poker going on with people like in their living rooms zooming into this digital poker game. And we were watching that as a sporting event over what was going on in the Link in Philadelphia. The Giants got killed. Shout out the NFC for, putting this horrible NFC East product in prime time in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. Should be a war crime. The Eagles, for their part, weren't even trying to throw the ball for the majority of the game. They've been hard carried all year and were hard carried last night by their unfair offensive line. Unfair is really the only word for it. They've always been unfair this season, and games are, in fact, won in the trenches in the NFL in the postseason. So credit to them, credit to their offensive line. They have really 2 starting offensive lines when you include their depth at O-line. So it's ridiculous just how good they are, and it's ridiculous how healthy they are, by the way. It was reported by Shil Kapadia, who works for The Ringer and covers the Eagles, who I enjoy his work. He said the Eagles are now 15-1 with Jalen Hurts as their starter this year. And barring an unforeseen injury this week, they're going to have 21 of 22 regular starters available for the NFC Championship game. So from August till today, they're going to have just one guy not in that starting rotation they originally started the year planning to have. That, boys and girls, is how you win in January. And this is directed at the Titans, of course, because I think that they would have gone into the playoffs with like 7 of 22 guys maybe available as starters. It was a disaster all year. Maybe don't have more than half of your team unavailable if you want to win in the playoffs. They're also, for the Giants' part, just to put a bow on this, before we move on to the next game, there was a time when my take on the magical fall for the New Jersey teams and the Giants and the Jets had come to an end. Both teams started like 7-1, 7-2, and then they both crashed down to earth in the mid to late season. And I thought that, it's over. The mask is off on these frauds. It wasn't quite off, and there was a time where it looked like that take might be bad. The Giants really beat around the Vikings in the playoffs, a team that had only, lost 3 or 4 games in the regular season, and then went on to the link in Philadelphia with a chance to go to the NFC Championship game, and then they got destroyed. So that time is over. It no longer looks like a bad take. We've not aged poorly. We avoided poor aging on this tweet, on this take. The New Jersey teams this year, although improved, although more wins than they've had in like the last 4 years combined, they were in fact not very good.
Let's move on to the next game, and my personal favorite game of the week, the
is
Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Shiesty going up to Buffalo in the snow to beat the Buffalo Bills 27-10.
All the credit in the world to the Bengals, man. Outside of, I'd say it's the most impressive beatdown of the weekend, but really, there's no contending with that Eagles game. Outside of the Eagles game, this was really not even remotely a competition. It was the best performance by a team, I think, on the weekend by the Bengals. But really what stood out to me in this game, and not to take anything away from what the Bengals did, the Bills, man, you're even as a Bengals fan, you have to be sitting there thinking they're supposed to be putting up a better fight than this. This is atrocious.
They shot themselves in the foot right from the get-go.
10,000 times, man.
You could look right on that first play. You cannot. I get it. The snow is there, and if you want to even say that was a turning point, Cincinnati today, by the way, got the most snow that they've gotten in 2 or 3 years. They got about 6 inches on the day. So if this game was in Cincinnati, it was going to be snowing just as much as it was in Buffalo. But I digress. You cannot leave Jamar Chase able to run freely and just have that big of blown coverage on 7 of the first 8 plays of the game.
Yeah, exactly. I was tweeting through the frustration through this entire game because it was so hard to watch. I was financially pulling for the Bills, but besides that, it was that was out the window by halftime. I was no longer hoping for that. I was just hoping for it to become a game. It never did. Everyone was wide open, every single play in the snow. When it's a game like that, the defense, the secondary, is at such a massive disadvantage because you as a receiver know where you're going and the defender usually does not. And so you're at an advantage when you have that footing in the snow that's really lacking as compared to what you typically have if conditions were normal. So people are wide open every play, man. Why would you ever run the ball when the game is being changed that dramatically? And then I tweeted at the Bills in response to that tweet, like, guys, stop running the ball. Stop running the ball. It was so frustrating to watch them continue to try to establish the run when they didn't have to in this game. The Bengals, for their part, did what they were supposed to do, and they kind of took what was given to them. They lived in the intermediate. They lived with what the Bills were giving to them and allowing them to essentially be killed by 1,000 paper cuts, and the Bengals were happy to oblige. The Bills, they just looked so soft today. They looked so soft, and it was a massive disappointment for a team that, both sides of the ball were a disaster in this game, but the defense let them down in a massive way. Trey White getting a PI call on the goal line is such a tough look when he's guarding Trent Irwin. Man.
Put some more respect on my
Trey
boy's
White.
name.
No,
okay?
I absolutely
do not
won't.
disrespect.
I absolutely
Trent
won't. Trey
Irwin.
White's supposed to be one of the best cornerbacks in the league, and he was so bad today. So bad. The offense, for their part, was almost as bad as the defense. Their game plan was a disaster. Cincinnati played the game perfectly from an offensive standpoint, so it was just a tough watch. The Bills, their play calling was kind of sporadic, and there's no way to tell without going back and looking at the tape in the All-22 whether or not a lot of that confusing element of the Bills offense was coming from the play calling being whack or Josh Allen's decision making being whack. Because listen, it's easy to blame an offensive coordinator for The play that came to mind for me, JT, is when Josh Allen on 3rd and 2, when they're not dead quite yet, takes a deep ball shot to Gabe Davis up the sideline, who has the ball and essentially just kind of drops it. But people are like, why are you calling that on 3rd and 2? Like, we're taking deep shots on 3rd and 2 when you need a first down. You're in territory where going for it would be kind of a bad idea. We can't know. I mean, maybe that wasn't the call. Like, Josh Allen may have just said, we ball, he's down there somewhere, and tried to get away with it. So, like, we don't know. But somebody did a horrible job when it came to establishing any kind of flow or momentum in this game. And it's just, I could go on and on. The defense looked so soft. I don't know if it was the snow or not. This is supposed to be their element, right? They looked like the Titans in Green Bay in 2020 on Sunday Night Football when they just were out of their element entirely. The Bills looked so uncomfortable, and the Bengals looked so comfortable. The nightmare just continued to grow for the Bills, and Trey White was horrendous all day. They kept getting penalties called on them that, seemed kind of lopsided. Like the Bills definitely got more penalties in that game and more costly penalties, but you can't get mad at the refs because every time they'd show the replay, it was deserved. They were committing the foul. So I don't know what to tell you. It's not shocking really in hindsight to see the Bills come up short, although I didn't expect it to come in this fashion, this dramatically. But it does once again prove, JT, that you should always, always, always bet against the preseason favorite. The NFL is just way too hard to remain at the top of the league for 5 consecutive months. The only guys in this century, I went and looked, the only guys in this century to do that, be the preseason favorite and win the Super Bowl at the end of the year, their names are Tom and Peyton. That's the group you got to be in. Otherwise, forget about it. And the Bills are just the latest victim of that. I think if you're a fan of a team, you should always hope they are one of the teams considered a contender at the beginning of the year, but never the outright favorite. If Vegas is favoring them, you are in trouble. You are in trouble, and you should not let yourself become deluded to the fact that this probably is not going to end up going well for you. But yeah, all in all, this Bills team, the game plan, play calling, decision making, individual performances, all of it an unmitigated disaster. And really the thing that stuck out most in hindsight is that Sean McDermott, man, tough look, getting thoroughly outclassed by Zach Taylor, who's not exactly a guy with a ton of respect around the league. Maybe he deserves more, but even if he does deserve more, that is not a great look for a guy in Sean McDermott who has a lot of respect in the league. And I think people may be reconsidering that just a little bit because that's a particularly bad look in my opinion.
And then we can't get out of this game here without, of course, we wouldn't be a Titan show without talking about the Josh Dobbs-like fumble incomplete pass by Josh Allen.
The NFL has proven over the past 2 weeks in the playoffs that turns out what Josh Dobbs did in week 18 in Jacksonville that was ruled a fumble that was the thing that lost the game for the Titans because they were going to win otherwise. Turns out that wasn't a fumble, man. Turns out that's a forward pass. It was always a forward pass. We called it a forward pass at the time. And listen, I don't think Titans fans should get all up in arms in this. Like they're ticked off that the Titans didn't get to the playoffs. It would have been a fun outcome for them to win the division again. But, either way, the ceiling was low. It seemed the ceiling was low and the odds were slimmer. So it's not that they're upset. I think Titans fans are upset that their team's not in, but they are upset that the league just so blatantly and flippantly ignored, a proper review, and there's no consistency, it seems, when it comes to ruling that play a forward pass, incomplete pass, and not a fumble, because the exact same play has happened every week in week 18, the wild card round, the divisional round, and every single week it has not mattered. It has mattered who exactly is the one making the forward pass. Because if you're Josh Dobbs, they don't want to see you in the playoffs. But if you're already in the playoffs and your name is Josh Allen, then it's a forward pass. And don't worry about it, honey. We got you. We'll handle it. I will say the last thing on this game that I am appreciative of, the silver lining for a guy who bet the Bills like me, is that at least the NFL doesn't get the taste of the money bags with the divisional or the conference championship game on a neutral site, right? Because they were going to get that sweet taste of the Atlanta game that Joe Burrow very, I think, humorously said they should start sending some refunds because it's funny that the NFL has to send all those tickets back now. they were selling tickets to that game, but they won't get any stupid ideas on that front because it would be super, super dumb for them to make the conference championship games neutral site games. Hate that idea. Glad they're not going to get to try it.
Speaking of dumb, let's move on to the final game of this divisional round slate, in which I think is maybe the dumbest divisional round playoff game I've ever witnessed in my entire life.
Why is that? Before I give my thoughts, what was so dumb to you?
The Cowboys. I think
the game, by the way, the Cowboys who lost to the 49ers, right?
Yes, the Cowboys who
19.
lost 19-12 to the 49ers. I've never seen a more poorly played game in my entire life. Now, it might be on Dak, but also I think this game plan by Mike McCarthy was just atrocious.
I'm shocked that you think Mike McCarthy is not a very good coach, but yeah, I mean, listen, I have to eat crow on the Bills-Bengals bet. When we made bets last week for the show, we were discussing taking the Cowboys, and we were also discussing taking the Bengals. I talked to JT out of both. I was wrong on the Bengals one, but I'm glad we didn't take the sharp side of Dallas. I told you at the time, JT, I'm very confident this is a sharp trap. I think it's the exact same thing that we fell into in the wild card round with the Buccaneers and the Cowboys. And I'm glad we avoided it because they obviously were not the better team in this game. We got to see the Dak that we all grew to know and love this season when he threw 2 interceptions in the first half, and certainly wasn't the guy that he was last week in Tampa Bay. We also got to see Brett Maher continue to live in hell for a little bit as his first point after attempt was blocked. I don't know what he deserved to have this happen to him, but he did finally right the ship. So his season didn't end on the worst possible terms. I will say he's probably a little bit more concerned about his job than he was a couple of weeks ago. It is, of course, not a whole lot of thoughts on this game other than I'm glad it's the Niners that move on to get to face the Eagles because I think the Eagles would have killed the Cowboys. So I'm glad it'll be a competitive game. But it is one of the best days of the year, each and every year, for those of us who celebrate, JT, when the Cowboys have their season ended. It's a very nice, very good feeling. And I'm glad that we get to experience that once again. And the Cowboys once again don't get to a conference championship game, which is a long-running and established tradition. Moving on from these games and looking towards the rest of the playoffs before we get out of here. And I know we've gone long once again, but hey, it's what we do around here. My rooting interests, just for the record, going forward in the playoffs. And I'm curious if you agree, Jay. Well, of course, you're not going to agree because you're a Bengals fan, but I'm pulling for the 49ers first and foremost, and then the Bengals behind them, and then like a significant gap, the Chiefs, and then an even more significant gap, the Eagles. Is that essentially your rooting interests, but flip the Bengals and the Chiefs?
Yeah,
or flip the Bengals and the Niners.
Yeah, I think I would flip the Bengals and Niners.
So go Bengals, Niners, Chiefs, Eagles.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put the gap between the Bengals or the Niners and Chiefs would be just a little closer because when it comes down to brass tacks, if the Eagles were to get past the 49ers, anybody who can just beat the Eagles, please, I will root for them any day of the week.
Fair enough. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. Glad everybody stuck around, and hopefully you know a lot more about Ran Carthon than you did previously. We're going to have another show on Wednesday, JT. I'm going to go ahead and announce it. We'll say for sure on Wednesday, we will have that show that we recorded last week going through the mock draft 1.0 of No Flags Film with our guy, James Foster. It's a fantastic episode. It's already recorded. We'll have it for you first thing Wednesday morning, and then we'll be back on Friday, first thing Friday morning, to get ready to cover all the Titans news of the week, as well as look ahead to the conference championship weekend ahead. That should be pretty exciting. Hopefully it's finally a weekend of some heavyweight fights between some teams. Real quick before we go, please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. I know that we have some new reviews in there. We're running out of time today. I promise we're going to get to them on Friday's show. We will read those out. Would love to hear from you guys. If you've not reviewed the show already, it takes 10 seconds. Scroll to the bottom of the feed like you're picking an episode and click on the 5 stars. Click the 5th star to give it 5 stars. And if you leave a 5-star rating and then write a review underneath in the review box, say whatever you want. We will read it on air on the show, shout you out, leave your Twitter handle or your Instagram handle or whatever. We'll be happy to follow you. Tell all of our hundreds of listeners to follow you. Really appreciate you guys listening to the show and reviewing the show. Leave us recommendations of things you want to see or things you can't stand that we do. We want to continue to tweak the show to make it a better experience for you, the listener, and we appreciate you guys tuning in because it's the only reason that we do this in the first place, hoping to build an audience and provide you guys with some value. So we appreciate you being loyal listeners of the show. And if you don't rate and review, at least tell your friends and family, Titans fans, let them know that this is the show you listen to and you enjoy it and you think they would enjoy it as well. Text them the show, share it with them, help them out. Maybe grandma doesn't know how to get to the podcast app. Help her out, send her the episode. Very appreciative of all of the help you guys do to help our grassroots effort here to build up the show. And until Wednesday, when we get back with the James Foster Friday draft episode, we will talk to you then, and then on Friday. Until then, I am your host, Easton Freeze, for producer JT. This has been the Hot League Podcast. Have a great week.